for many of us, introduction to playing RPGs solo were pre-programmed adventures, and the earliest ones were from Tunnels and Trolls, which came out in the 70s with pre-programmed adventures, and that was what I first started my solo journey on, not in the 70s, but when I first started playing solo RPG. I never loved the process of a pre-programmed adventure because it just felt like I was flipping from paragraph to paragraph and kind of doing what it said and not really getting involved in a story or a fleshed out world. And what I have to show you here is something that for me finally really changes that. These are a series of pre-programmed solo adventures that are keyed to old school essentials as well as the fantasy trip, although they could be used with other rule sets with some modification, that for me, for the first time, really bring together a three-dimensional world where you actually feel like you are the characters playing out this type of scene. For example, in Dragon Hunt, they are, in a word, not your old school pre-programmed adventures. They are very much modified to create a story in this case, 44 action-packed pages, heroes tracking and fighting some of the baddest monsters the OSR has to offer. And that is not an overpromise. That actually is what you get when you play through these adventures. I actually haven't played through Dragon Hunt yet, but it is on my list. The author, David Pulver, has made a bunch of these. They're different types of missions. So this, Till Death Do Us Part, is an escort mission that you are using. It's a branch pathway solo adventure, escorting two VIPs across a treacherous route to deliver a bride to the altar in time for the wedding. And in the course of this adventure and others, you are traveling, you are going to islands, you are taking boats, you are paying for lodging, you are encountering NPCs. Of course, you are having combat, and the parties that you are managing in these games are actually parties. It's more than one character, and that is a lot different than the traditional or the original pre-programmed adventures, where typically you are kind of one overblown character. But what we're looking at down here as an example is a combat situation from one of the adventures, and I have these combat cards that are produced. These are the reference cards, and they are keyed to the various adventures. You don't need to use them. I think they're very helpful because they have not only a reference for the combat rules, but they have all the stats on them, and you can play out. This is this is something else that I had from Inkwell Adventures. I'll put the link down below, that I chose something to kind of approximate this laboratory situation. This is an anti-vampire potion that is sitting here that is kind of going to be at the center of this conflict, and I have the characters here. Now, it is pretty involved when you're managing combat with this many characters and you're managing all the combat. So for another adventure that I played through, I truncated the combat a bit, where I rolled a 1d4 at the outset to predetermine basically how many rounds of combat there were going to be, and a minimum of 2 rounds. So basically between 2 and 4 rounds of combat. And then I kept a running tally of the wounds that each side had. And at the end, if I had more wounds, that was considered a success. If I didn't, I kind of modified that into what the failure would be. I didn't let myself die. I took the wounds, but I took a detriment. That was my style of modification because the combat for me was getting a little too lengthy. But that's my preference. And in general, when I play solo, I'm not super interested in the combat. In the case of these rule books, though, what is interesting about the combat is the amount of theme that comes through, because you're in a setting, you are in belief of that setting, because the stories are that well developed, and you are managing your characters and their relationship to the world, both with random travel event tables that you roll on. So you could have, in effect, wandering monsters or random travel events that come up. So that will make it feel like there's some danger or mitigation. You're not just going from paragraph X to paragraph Y. You may, along the way, have something happen. You have to pay for your travel. For example, if you're taking a boat, you have to pay for your lodging. You have a time element that you need to accomplish something in a certain amount of time. You have money that you need to manage, and things that you can do in towns for getting more things that you might need, spending rations, changing your equipment, buying items and things of that nature. All of that is accomplished in this pre-programmed form. And I think this is the richest example of that I have encountered. Part of that richness does come from the fact that you will be playing more than one character. So you have various types of characters that you're playing, and they, as I said, do have relationship to each other as well as to the story. And the stories are quite different. So in this particular story, it says, another dark lord is on the rise, threatening to bring death and destruction to all who oppose him, and maybe a few who don't. With a name like Dark Legion, could one really expect it to end any differently than in a massacre? This Dark Legion, this Dark Lord, assembled the Red Fang orcs and defeated the elves of Amberwood. Now his voracious gaze turns on the kingdom. You are going to play a squad of soldiers fighting an all-out war to defeat the evil lord before it's too late. So this is a traditional sort of a many against one kind of adventure. And you could see, I'm not obviously intentionally showing you a lot of the interior, because that is the gist of playing these games, is to be surprised. And indeed, surprise happens here. But this is an example of how it is, what it looks like on the inside. Pretty old school and familiar if you've played these before. There are a number of suggested maps and things in some of them with, let's see here, where you can position your characters for combat. And as I said, I sort of proxied that in a way to make it work for the materials that I had. And this is roughly the layout of what you see there and the various characters here. You can choose or not to abide by encumbrance rules and distance rules and things of that nature, pretty much as you would be modifying any type of rule set that you play with. I chose the old school essentials version to play because I have the updated, or this is what I have for OSE. There are also keyed to the fantasy trip. And if you've been following my channel, you know that one of the very first solo RPG videos I did was based in the fantasy trip rules, but I don't have the updated version of those. So, and in general, I find that old school essentials is more to my liking just in terms of a rule set. So I went with that, but these are all available in different versions. So depending on what rule set you want to use, and again, you could probably modify it to work with other types of rule sets if you had them, and just extract from that. The cards, if you're using them, are going to be keyed to, obviously, to OSE if that's what you're using, and that is what I chose, and I appreciated the cards a lot. It helped me organize the information and not have to create individual character sheets. I could just keep track of the information as it unfolded. So I think that David's work has taken the pre-programmed adventures in a direction that I haven't seen before, just in terms of the depth of the world that's created, the management of multiple characters that makes sense narratively, and the feeling of a dramatic story actually unfolding, as opposed to just kind of like trying to get through the paragraphs, which had always been my issue with pre-programmed adventures until I came across these.